Okay, I think we're going to get started. Welcome everyone to the Solar Energy Business Association of New England's Massachusetts Gubernatorial Forum. My name is Mark Sylvia. I'm the president of SEBANE's Board of Directors, the chief of staff at Blue Wave, and your moderator for today's forum. SEBANE's mission is to protect and promote the New England solar industry through informed policy intervention, coalition building, and stakeholder education. With over 70 member companies representing all sectors of the solar industry, we focus our efforts on policy advocacy, programming and training, and events such as this gubernatorial forum to strengthen our field, exchange ideas, and expand access to solar. Next slide. Today's forum will consist of introductions and opening statements from each of the declared candidates for governor, followed by questions for which I will be joined by my colleague, Nick Darbeloff, on topics including clean energy with a focus on solar, current administration, policy, utilities, land use, environmental justice, and low income and jobs. We'll wrap up the forum with a lightning round of questions as well. For your information, we will be recording this forum so that it can be shared. I'd like to also thank our annual sponsors, Iron Ridge and LG, for their year-long financial support, helping make programs such as this possible. Faced with a severe climate crisis, it's an all hands on deck approach, and the next governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts will play a central role in leading the way. To that end, we have invited declared candidates for governor of Massachusetts to spend some time with us, sharing their thoughts and plans for addressing the climate challenge, accelerating the adoption of clean energy, and expanding access to all. And I'm really pleased to be joined by a number of those declared candidates today. And we will begin by introducing State Senator Sonia Chang-Diaz, who's running for the Democratic nomination for governor. Sonia is a former public school teacher and the first Latina to serve in the Massachusetts State Senate. She represents the 2nd Suffolk Senate District, which includes various wards and precincts in the city of Boston. Sonia has been a leading champion for education funding reform, criminal justice and police reform, environmental justice, fair taxation, voting rights, affordable housing, green public transportation, and protections for immigrants. As a candidate for governor, Sonia is building a movement to tackle the state's biggest challenges and restore Massachusetts's promise to all families. So I'd like to introduce Sonia to provide her opening statements.
Thanks, Mark. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
All right, great. Good afternoon. I think we're in the afternoon now. Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Ben and Danielle, it's also good to be here with you for this discussion. And to all the folks joining, it is an honor to be here with so many leaders in one of the state's most exciting and important industries for our state. And I want to give a quick hat tip to my friend Ben as one of those leaders. I'm Sonia Chang-Diaz. I am a mom and, as you heard, a former public school teacher and Massachusetts' first Latina state senator. And I am running for governor because every day it's getting harder and harder for families across our state to live here and raise their kids here, right? Housing and healthcare prices, worst in the nation congestion, the dearth of childcare, and hanging over it all, the consequences of climate change are already barreling towards us. Climate change is an existential threat to our state, to our country, and our world. And it's not just coming, it's already here. We're already seeing record-breaking heat and rainfall and damaging storms worse than ever before. We are on track for sea level rises that will put our communities underwater. And our lower income communities, and I know SEBANE knows this, and our communities of color will face the worst effects. Our state has the third highest number of affordable housing units at risk of coastal flooding in the country. So here's the reality. The fight against climate change is not about just one issue. It's the whole ballgame. And unless we act now, this crisis will only deepen. As a mother and as a public servant, I refuse to accept that future for our kids and our state. But now here's the good news. We have the tools and the resources to meet this crisis and build a better future for our state. The only question is, do we have the urgency and the courage to use those tools? We know how to win the fight against climate change by passing a Green New Deal for Massachusetts, to build a new green economy to sustain our planet and all of our families as well. For the last 12 years in the legislature, I have fought like hell for bold transformational change like this in our education systems, in our criminal justice system, for LGBTQ rights, and I've won. But here's what I've also learned during that time. We have still got too many people in government, most especially our current governor, who are more concerned with holding on to power than doing something with it. I'm running to change that. We don't have time to wait on climate change. We can and we must transition to completely renewable energy, investing in buildings that are going to give us a 21st century green economy, capable of that transition, standing with communities of color against the disproportionate impacts of pollution and climate change. I know that this future is possible, not as an article of faith, but because I have seen transformational change happen before. We just need to stand together, see each other's fights as our own, and elect a governor who will lead this fight, not wait until it's forced upon him or her. A governor who will deliver the bold transformational change that we need. So I look forward to our discussion today and answering your questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Our next declared candidate for governor is Mr. Orlando Silva. He's also running for the Democratic nomination for governor. Orlando has experience in many areas, having worked in the trades, restaurants, manufacturing, and more. In 2005, Orlando started his own business, a full-service duct cleaning company. Pro Air Duct Cleaning is a successful business employing 10 at peak times. Although a political newcomer, Orlando is running for governor because he not only believes in the American dream, but also that Massachusetts can be more. I'd now like to introduce Orlando Silva to make his opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure being here. I'm humbled to be in the presence of so many people that are so talented and so well-rounded in such a subject. My name is Orlando Silva. I am originally from Brazil. I've been here for about 30 years. In this 30 years, I was blessed to be a part of the American dream and live the American dream. I believe that in this 30 years that I've been here, I've seen a little bit of that American dream diminish. And now I wanted to afford that American dream and make that American dream more viable for my kids. And this is what we all want to. We want to make sure that our kids have a great future going forward. I believe that our politicians are not up to par or just too comfortable. Therefore, we need new thoughts to get in there and try to make a difference. As a governor, I hope to make changes on our education, make changes on how we address our state. We have a lot of potential on our state, and it's been overlooked, to say the least. I hope that in the future, in many months to come, I'll be seeing more of you, and I believe that alternative energy is a must. It's just a must. There is no way for us to move forward without tackling this problem. We can be followers or we can be leaders. That's the only way that we can do this. We can follow somebody else lead, or we can be the leading country to make a difference in the world. And I believe we can be the leading company. Massachusetts is a powerful state that can introduce and show the rest of the country how to make changes for the better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Orlando. Our next declared candidate for governor is former State Senator Ben Downing, who is also running for the Democratic nomination for governor. Ben Downing served as a state senator for a decade, representing cities and towns in the Berkshires and Western Massachusetts. He was a climate action leader while in the Senate and as a lifelong public servant dedicated to serving his community. After a decade in the State House, he chose to dedicate himself full-time to the climate crisis and joined Nexamp, a leading renewable energy company. Here he worked to expand access to clean energy in Massachusetts and beyond. As governor, he intends to respond forcefully to shameful racial disparities, healthcare, housing, education, transportation, food security, and the fundamentals every family needs to survive and lead the nation in the climate crisis and environmental justice. And now welcome Ben Downing to make some introductory remarks.
Thanks so much, Mark, and it's great to be with you, Sonia, Danielle, and Orlando. It's great to be with the SEBANE members and so many leaders in climate and clean energy here today. I look forward to the back and forth, to the questions, and I look forward to the opportunity to introduce myself in full. As Mark mentioned, my name is Ben Downing. I'm a Pittsfield native and a former senator from Western Mass. For the last 5 years, a clean energy business leader, and these days a dad to 2 toddler boys, Michaela's husband, and a proud resident of East Boston. I decided to run for governor because I was tired of watching too many state leaders waste our time. I was tired of watching a governor with all the popularity and a legislature with all the power refuse to use either to fight for us. Meanwhile, the communities that I call home, that I represented, that I live in, they see rents rise and jobs leave. They see trains run off the track and air clog. They see childcare wait lists grow longer and higher education grow further out of reach. They see too many state leaders care more about protecting their power than about protecting their people. I'm running to be your governor because I believe the future of Massachusetts is limitless, but I know that our time is not. And for too long, the political power in this state, Democrats and Republicans, have acted as though we have a surplus of tomorrows. Like you all, I didn't need COVID to show me that wasn't the case. I grew up in Pittsfield, a city that struggled and had to fight for itself. I know what it is to get knocked down. My city got knocked down as I was growing up. GE left and took all the jobs. We were left cleaning up and rebuilding. The message that my generation heard was crystal clear. Study hard and get out. The best days of your hometown are behind it. My family got knocked down too, when my dad and my younger brother, Nate, died suddenly from heart disease less than 10 years apart. They were the center of my world, my role model and my best friend. So I know what it takes to get back up, to grow stronger at the broken places. I know what it feels like to have your community rally around you and hold you up when you don't know if you could stand without them. Loss shaped the kind of person that I am and the leader that I strive to be. It deepened my empathy and fueled my sense of urgency. It pushed me to run for the Senate. I got into a race with a lot of candidates who had longer resumes than me. I was dismissed, like young people too often are, until I won, and then went on to represent the largest Senate district in Massachusetts for 10 years. There I led efforts to increase clean energy production, to fight poverty and hunger, working alongside Sonia to expand transgender civil rights to our neighbors. I did that and much more, and then kept a promise I made in that first election to term limit myself. I went to work in clean energy. Michaela and I moved to East Boston and started a family. Malcolm and Eamon joined us, and we learned quickly the only thing more renewable than solar energy is a toddler's commitment to tire and terrify their parents every single day. You know, East Boston and Pittsfield, they're 150 miles apart, different in a million ways, but similar at the core, and similar to so many communities across this state. Tough, striving, creative, generous places that have had to fight much harder than they should to get access to resources and attention from Beacon Hill. And that's what brings me here today. That's what brings me to this race, because I've lived and seen the difference that leadership makes. I know what it feels like to be an afterthought, to be forgotten, to be written off. I know exactly who suffers when those in power kick the can down the road, and we can't afford to do that anymore. Time is the least renewable resource we have, especially when it comes to the climate fight. So I look forward to talking with you all about how we break out of that culture and how we start acting with urgency to build the Massachusetts we want to live in, a 100% clean energy Massachusetts, the Massachusetts we know is possible. Thanks for everything you have done. Thank you for the opportunity for all of us to be here today. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Ben. Our final declared candidate for governor is Dr. Danielle Allen, who is also running for the Democratic nomination for governor. Danielle is a nonprofit leader, policy innovator, author, and educator. She's a James Bryant Conant University professor and director of the Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics at Harvard University. When COVID hit, she assembled a rapid response network of 40 researchers and 8 institutions to lay out a policy roadmap. The roadmap, pandemic resilience, and wrote the bipartisan Suppress COVID Act. As governor, she intends to continue to advance the causes of freedom and inequality and to lay economic and health foundations on which we all can flourish. Welcome, Danielle.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you, SEBANE, for this important conversation. And Ben, Sonia, Orlando, it's terrific to be here with you, working together on transformation in our Commonwealth. I am Danielle Allen. Mark, I apologize. I have to correct one thing in my bio. I've turned in my day job, so I'm on leave from the university. Somebody else is director of that ethics center now. So I just want to clarify that for transparency's sake. But I am candidate for governor and so thrilled to be with you all here today. Now, when I was a kid, I grew up in Southern California, and my family used to go to New Mexico every summer. We would drive across the western, through the eastern edges of California, across the desert, and there were these huge arrays of windmills churning out energy. And I used to sit in the backseat of the car and just wonder, what would it be like when this amazing space, it looked like outer space, could become something that might power our whole world. And then in the 80s, my family was the first to get solar panels on our family house, first on the block. And I called my dad recently to ask him, why was that? Why was he an early adopter? His answer was 2 words: tax credits. So it works. Public investment works. It can drive transformation. And now here we sit, this incredible moment in time and history. The costs of solar and wind have fallen dramatically, of energy storage. It is really within our grasp to achieve a transition, a transformation to a 100% renewable energy by 2040. I am committed to that transition. I'm running for governor because I believe it's time for us to reimagine ourselves as one Commonwealth and to knit our diverse communities across the state together so that we can achieve that important work of transformation. I believe it's time for us to build public commitment for hard work and strategic investment in the basic building blocks of a green and healthy next generation democracy. That commitment to 100% renewable energy by 2040 exceeds the goals in the wonderful next generation climate roadmap that was passed earlier this year. That's because the time is here for bold action in response to our urgent problems. And we can do it. How? The key thing is that right now we're living in a situation where we're kind of like people driving a gas car who are tweaking and adapting at the margins, trying to get a little bit more, something other than gas in the system. The reason we're stuck here is because we've got fossil fuel companies at the table writing regulations, trying to pave the way to this transition. We need the right people in the driver's seat. We need the people who are building the renewable energy infrastructure in the driver's seat. We need people who have direct experience of the environmental impacts of fossil fuels, people from environmental justice communities in the driver's seat. In order to make good on that commitment to get to 100% renewable energy by 2040, I believe the most important thing I could do as governor is to make sure that the right people are on our commissions for executing on the roadmap, are at the driver's seat for that work with the DPU, Department of Public Utilities. So that is really fundamental work that I am focused on. Again, imagine that sort of gas car we're driving along trying to tweak it. Think back to what we've seen in the automotive industry. First, we had the Prius, a hybrid vehicle. Then we got the Tesla, fully electric vehicle. We didn't get there by tweaking at the margins. We got there because the people who are building renewable energy infrastructure were in the driver's seat. And that's what we need now. A real design for our energy infrastructure, not just for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but for the region. That means we also really importantly need a governor who will drive partnerships throughout the region so that we can proactively and strategically do the work of designing a renewable energy infrastructure and delivering on it. I am committed to this work. It's clear what we should do. It is a time for bold, urgent action of transformation. I believe and have spent my career bringing big teams together to lay out a policy framework and then implement on it to clear objectives. So I'm delighted to be able to have a chance to dig into the details with all of you today. Thank you again for hosting this important forum. This question could not be more important. It is time to build a green and healthy next generation democracy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Really appreciate your opening remarks. And those of the other declared candidates, we have 4 great candidates who we will now be asking a series of questions to. I'll be joined in the questioning by my colleague, the Vice President of the SEBANE Board of Directors, focusing on policy, and a representative from Sunbug Solar, Nick Darbeloff. Nick will start off the questioning. The first topic will be related to clean energy with a focus on solar. Each of the candidates will have 90 seconds to respond to the questions that are asked of them. We'll then alternate on topics between Nick and myself. So at this point, Nick, if you want to join, then I will turn it over to you for the first round of questions. And again, really appreciate the opening statements from each of the 4 candidates and their focus and commitment to clean energy and climate issues.
Thank you, Mark. We're going to begin with our first question, and I believe the order will begin with Ben Downing, and then we'll change the order as we move forward. The question is this, Ben. With the uncertainty around the New England Clean Energy Connect transmission line following the recent Maine referendum, what is your plan for helping Massachusetts meet its goals for achieving 100% renewables, net zero emissions by 2050?
I appreciate the question, Nick. So first, I think we need to stop outsourcing the ability, the responsibility to meet our climate obligations to other states. Yes, we need regional partnerships. Yes, we need to work in collaboration with other states to rebuild the transmission grid for a 100% clean energy future. But we can't be solely dependent on other states' action to achieve our goals. And too often of late, we have been. That will end when I'm governor. My strategy for hitting those 100% clean electricity and clean energy targets that I've outlined in the climate plan that I released in March are clear. We get there through an increase in the renewable portfolio standard, more regular RFPs for offshore wind and large-scale renewable resources, a new solar incentive program to build off of the SMART program. We use other tools to improve our energy efficiency programs, to expedite and finally fix the interconnection, the broken interconnection process, to deploy thermal clean energy solutions using federal resources and state-based incentive programs, then making all of our state fleets, all public fleets, electric vehicles. Finally, we also need to link this to other areas of state government and our budget. We need to make greater investments in transit and affordable housing to make our communities more sustainable, walkable, and livable. So it is that urgency, the prioritization, and the pace of our work that has to be critically different. We do that through using our existing tools. That's the plan that I outlined in March. That's why I'm running to be governor. This will be my #1 priority.
Thank you, Ben. Danielle, let me know if you'd like me to repeat the question.
No, thank you so much. No, of course, it was a real setback, the news around the New England Clean Energy Transmission Line and the vote of our fellows in Maine on that front. And we have to recognize what that setback signals. It signals that at the core of our challenge is the relationship between the good of our state and the good of our region. Of course, that's connected to the good of the country too. So the first thing we have to do is clarify our goal. We have been using a vocabulary of pursuing net zero by 2050. We need to be bolder. We need to go for 100% renewable by 2040. So that's the first thing we have to do. Now, how do we achieve that? It does require deep and society-wide decarbonization. My campaign is focused on basic building blocks: housing, transportation, schools, good jobs, and justice. And we've got to work on housing and transportation together in order to drive that transition to renewable energy economy. Of course, it is issues in housing around heating, huge amounts of emissions there for housing. Ditto for transportation. We've got to drive a transition to the use of electric vehicles, to public transportation, and the like. So we've got to do that work as a starting point to lay the foundation for a renewable energy economy. That takes investment, public investment. It also takes all kinds of things from zoning reform to regulatory reform. So that's the work that we're focused on really defining. Then it also, as I said in my opening, takes putting the right people in the driver's seat. The right people in the driver's seat are people building renewable energy infrastructure and people from environmental justice communities. As we do this work, it is also so important that we see all the opportunities available here, including the jobs opportunities. So in that regard, we need to make sure that our economic development advocates are at the table too, delivering environmental justice and opportunity for all of our communities in Massachusetts.
Thank you, Danielle. Sonia.
Thanks, Nick. Like my colleagues on the panel, I will say that the failure of question 1 in Maine really illustrates the peril of relying on importing power from other countries to help us meet our clean energy goals, or on other states to build the infrastructure that we need to bring us that energy, right? Like being at the end of a very long extension cord is not a good place to be. We should be creating jobs and investment right here in Massachusetts by going big on solar, on offshore wind, on other renewables, and on energy storage, and on training our workers for jobs in the clean energy economy, and by building a clean energy future right here at home. We also need to, I share the view of my colleagues here, we need to do better than net zero by 2050. I would do that by transitioning to a 100% carbon-free electricity grid by 2030, by establishing a 100% clean energy standard for all of our suppliers here in the Commonwealth, and working closely with ISO New England and other New England states regionally, while investing in continued research and development through the Massachusetts CEC. Also by eliminating carbon emissions from new buildings by 2030, and transitioning existing buildings to become net carbon, zero carbon by 2045. And then lastly, by expanding, electrifying, and making fare free our public transit systems across the state, including establishing East-West Rail and robust regional transit networks as well. Fundamentally, we've got to recognize, right, the old wisdom: when you're stuck in a hole, the first thing you need to do to get out is to stop digging. So as governor, I will also, back up these commitments about making the transition in our transportation, our building, our grid, by also stopping using ratepayer dollars to pay for new fossil fuel infrastructure, and by using the substantial regulatory powers of the executive branch to say no to the development of new fossil fuel infrastructure projects here in Massachusetts.
Thank you, Sonia. Orlando. Orlando, are you with us?
I'm sorry about that. So I'm in agreement with everyone, especially Ben. There is one thing that I believe will make the biggest difference. We're already in track. We are working to make the difference to get that 100% renewable energy, but we need to motivate the private market so the people will have some sort of interest. It can't be only the government. It got to be other ways as well. Manufacturing, got to be investing in different part of the state where we can motivate and grow that part of the state. And by doing so, we can then make it a little more affordable. We can make it a little more interested and generate new ideas. Also, I believe that the genius and the people who can make a difference are those of that maybe are not heard. Obviously, we have a lot of regulatory problems. However, we need to start thinking long-term. Long-term, I believe that schooling, we need to start introducing that subject to schooling so we can have new ideas to help get there eventually. 2030 and 2040 seems, a great idea, but we need to, in order to get there, I think the private market will help us.
Great, thank you, Orlando. For our next question, we're going to begin with Danielle, and the question is this. Specifically, what would you do to accelerate the growth of solar installations in Massachusetts?
So for starters, again, we have to recognize that achieving transition here is going to require work at a regional level. So I would be working hard with the governors of our neighboring states to build a design project. Think of it as about energy flow broadly. There are great models elsewhere in the world, as you know. In Eastern Europe, for example, a terrific project called Future Flow, which is really focused on the question of how can you manage and stabilize an energy infrastructure with renewable energy as the sole foundation. We've got to do that proactive work from the governor's office as a starting point. That then gives us a framework for really opening up a wholesale transition to solar. We need to prepare the way for that by streamlining and making much more efficient the interconnection process, also net metering initiatives and approaches to make it much easier for people to connect to the grid so that we can really have that distributed system. But we are, as you know, making a transition from a one directional to a distributed system. And in order to do that, we really need proactive public engagement from the governor's office in the design of that system. We also will need investment. It's a big transition to get over that infrastructure hurdle. So we have to recognize that it is time for public commitment to get us over that infrastructure hurdle so that people can then connect to the grid effectively and give us the chance for bringing solar arrays on consistently around the Commonwealth. Lastly, we also really do need to back research and development for next generation solar technologies and connect that to work on energy storage so that we have the opportunity to deal with the ebbs and flows of the kind of energy we get from the sun and provide that stable as well as sustainable energy infrastructure.
Great, thank you, Danielle. Sonia.
Sorry, I always take a second to remember to get the mute button off. So Nick, you asked about how to accelerate growth, and accelerate is the right word. We need to move faster if we're going to avert climate disaster for our kids and not keep pushing the hard work of change to somebody else's administration. I support amending our state's building code to require rooftop solar on new construction wherever feasible, as California has done. We need to review, extend, and refresh the SMART program. This will help with small and medium-sized solar projects. And we have got to do a lot better on interconnection, right? And I think that this is probably about culture change more than anything else at the DPU. They have to get much more serious about doing the unglamorous and probably often uncomfortable sort of blocking and tackling with utilities to hasten interconnection of solar projects to the distribution network. That means, from a governor's standpoint, that means appointing DPU commissioners who are committed to driving those outcomes. And that is exactly what I'll do.
Great, thank you, Sonia. Orlando.
Thank you. So in order to accelerate the governor and the state have to be involved. We have to motivate, again, the private sector. We have to I wouldn't say easy, but make sure that we are following our guidelines but making available so people can invest on solar panels and solar power. But I also believe that on top of it all, we need to create a storage that makes it a lot easier and to distribute, and sort of a storage pump where we can reserve this extra energy that we have. There is a lot involved in this, and in order to do so, we have to be associated and get oriented by the industry leaders to get the best results on it, and maybe even look into other places. The interconnection grid, it's a great idea. Unfortunately, as everybody says, Maine is not in, but we need to find out, we need to work with everyone. We need to enforce, and maybe in Massachusetts, if we get a storage that the energy storage that it is viable, maybe other states will follow.
Thank you, Orlando. We're going to move on to our next question, and we will start with the question is this. Oh, I'm sorry, Ben. My apologies. Go right ahead.
Not at all. Not at all. So a couple of things here, right? First, I think we need to have certainty if we're trying to accelerate the deployment of solar across the state. One of the ways you can have certainty is to actually have a clear vision for where you want the electric grid to go, where we want to get as a state as a whole. So we need to have a third restructuring in Massachusetts, one that makes explicitly clear to the utilities that it is their requirement, their mission to get to a 100% clean energy future. We can look just over the border in New York to the REV process, that all-encompassing regulatory review and proceeding taken under by their PUC as a good model for how we drive everything towards a 100% clean energy future. So that's the certainty of that process and the clarity of the mission of the utilities. So there is no barrier standing in the way of the deployment of solar. Yes, we need to improve and expedite the interconnection process. I was on the other side of any number of projects where you would call day after day after day trying to get clarity. And that's no way to run a railroad. And yet we're running it like a railroad, not like the 21st century clean energy grid that we're trying to build. Developers need to have clarity. Homeowners need to have clarity. Community groups need clarity on where solar should go, why it should go there, what are the values that they're going to get for it. Along with all of this, we need to have equity built into all of the work from the beginning. We've seen, unfortunately, in the deployment of clean energy, that the benefits have flown directly to the wealthiest communities. We need to be intentional about our work. That's why I've prioritized a civilian climate corps as a part of my climate plan, so that the civilian climate corps can partner with local environmental organizations, community-based organizations, to make sure that the communities that have borne the brunt of our fossil fuel infrastructure and use see the direct benefit of the transition to a clean energy economy. That will open up market opportunities. And we see the leadership going on right now in Chelsea and in Chinatown with the microgrid project that they're working on. There are countless of opportunities just like that. Clarity, address the problems of interconnection, equity at the center of all that we do. That's how we accelerate solar development in Massachusetts.
Thank you, Ben. For the last question, we'll start with Orlando. And the question is, what is your plan to build resilience to storm impacts in Massachusetts?
I would have to, and again, I am in this panel. Ben is well-rounded. I am learning as I go along with a lot of this, and my plan would be, obviously get together with the industry leaders, think about how can we make this so we can be an example, and again, incentivize. I feel that incentivization of the private market and help with the government, we can make this happen. In order for us to do storm, in order to do so, we would have to lean on the industry. I wouldn't be able to tell you off the top of my head now.
Thank you, Orlando. For our next set of questions, back to you, Mark.
Thank you so much, Nick. Appreciate the opportunity to ask the next series of questions, which are related in part to the current administration and current policy in Massachusetts. Recognizing that each of the candidates not only have their platform, but are reflecting on what has and hasn't worked in the current administration on the topic of clean energy. So we'll begin with Sonia, and the first question is, what do you believe state government has done right and wrong in advancing solar and clean energy?
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. It's a great question. It's so important that we do call out and elevate the things going right, so that we can keep doing them and do more of them, and also just sustain hope. But there is also plenty to call out here that we're not doing right and that we need to do better on. So in the right category, I would say the fact that the climate roadmap bill added new elements to the DPU's mission, including and especially the effects on climate change of their decisions, and a concern for equity, right, being explicitly at the heart of their mandate. And I'm very proud to lay claim to the equity component that was, got into the legislation via an amendment that I filed. Also in the right category, I would note the way that the SMART program now includes incentives for storage as an add-on for points on solar projects. I think it's a simple, smart, no pun intended thing that we can do as a state to recognize, the need for intermittent renewable generation to be paired with storage. In the wrong category, this is unfortunately a longer list. I'd say three big picture things. One, we are still nibbling around the edges, right? We are not paying enough attention to interconnection and modernizing the grid infrastructure. Two, we are continuing to fail working families and low income communities, right? We see the fact that we're still paying unequal rates for solar generation for homeowners versus renters or subscribers to community solar. This is obviously a big equity problem, right? As we know that renters are disproportionately going to be lower income folks and disproportionately of color. And in addition to that disparity in those rates being patently unfair, it is also a failure of our policy to marshal all our people to the cause of slowing down climate change, right? If we're going to hit the goals that we want to hit in an aggressive and speedy way, we need to bring everybody into this work. Similarly, our electric vehicle subsidies have gone mostly to high income residents, and we need to restructure those programs. And then the last big picture thing that I would say is that we, in the wrong category is that we are continuing to invest in fossil fuel infrastructure. We are failing to use the Mass Save program to its full effect. To push further and faster to the clean energy transition, right? The fact that we are still digging that hole by subsidizing with ratepayer dollars new fossil fuel infrastructure is crazy. We have to have goals that are anchored not just in what's sort of better than yesterday or better than some other state, which is I think where the goal setting is anchored right now in Mass Save. We have to anchor those goals to what will actually work. To solve the problem and get us to the benchmarks we need to get to.
Thank you very much, Sonia, and appreciate the pun, the smart pun. It's such a solar industry thing, I guess. Same question to you, Orlando, and let me know each of the candidates if you need me to repeat the question, but same question to you, Orlando.
Okay, so on the right part, I think that we are going the right direction with the climate change. We are all aware that there is a climate change. Unfortunately, the politics part of it is getting in the way and not away. So we're not moving as fast as we should. I think the incentives are right, but it could be better. And I think Mass Save is sort of true. It's right and wrong. It's right because it's there, but it's wrong because it's not as well spread. Is people, a lot of people, you'd be surprised. On my industry, I go into homes and I see so much that can be done to save energy. And then I tell the homeowner, have you looked into Mass Save? You'd be surprised how many homeowners did not know about this. And so I think we are lacking in communications for us to get there. I think the interconnection part of it, it's a must. In order for us to make this viable, the interconnection part of it, it's a must. We have to have it. But the communication, I think, is something that we need to work on and more, so people are more aware. Therefore, we can address this more. I think the wrong part of it, the communication is one of the things. But overall, we are trying. We're trying to move forward, and I think that if we keep on trying, there's going to be another time for us to get there.
Thank you very much, Orlando. Same question to you, Ben.
Sure. So I think a couple of points there, Mark. I think first, one of the things that we did right was bet big on the front end. We did it in solar. We did it in the legislation that I authored on offshore wind. But it's worth pointing out, right, that at those earliest stages in the Patrick administration, in the first solar incentive programs, there was skepticism that we would even achieve those goals. And yet every single time along the way, when we have set bold, ambitious goals, not only have we achieved them, we have exceeded them. And many of the policy challenges we talk about now come from our success. So that is reason to redouble our efforts and to believe that with ambitious targets and goals that we can deploy all of the talent and the resources that we have to be able to achieve them. I think two other points on things that we have done right. And both of them are at the Mass Clean Energy Center. First, the Mass Clean Energy Center internship program. It is a small thing, but a powerful thing. And I know many of the employees at Nexamp, I think at one point it was a third of my fellow colleagues and coworkers came through that internship program. I'm sure many of the SEBANE members have benefited from that internship program. That is how you create a pipeline, and that is how you can create a diverse pipeline. I know that was a significant boon for Nexamp and other companies as well. It's a great program. It ought to be redoubled, and it can be when we double the Mass Clean Energy Center's budget in a Downing administration. Along with that, when we created the Mass Clean Energy Center, there were folks who just wanted that to be a business development organization. I wrote the amendment in the bill that required that we focus on poverty and workforce development and equity in the transition to a clean energy economy. Those are good steps that we've taken. To echo the comments of Sonia and Orlando and others here, I would point out that the inequities that we have seen in the benefits of clean energy, whether that's solar, certainly we'll see it again in storage, and we have seen it in the EV rebates, too often have flowed to our wealthier communities, while environmental justice communities, communities of color, those that have borne the brunt of our use of fossil fuel infrastructure, or fossil fuels and the location of fossil fuel infrastructure, have not seen the direct benefit of a transition to a clean energy economy. That's why in my climate plan, we prioritize 50% of the benefits of that transition to go to environmental justice communities. Final point, something we've done wrong, and it's about changing the culture on Beacon Hill. We have deferred too much to the utilities. We have assumed for some reason or another that the utilities are an independent actor in all of this. They have a view in how we ought to structure the future, and too often it is not compatible with the urgency and the goal of a 100% clean energy economy. I got an email from National Grid yesterday in my account asking me what I thought the future of gas in Massachusetts ought to be. I wanted to reply, none. I don't want the future to be gas in Massachusetts. I want the future to be 100% clean energy, and we need that to be the goal of everyone involved.
Thank you very much, Ben and Danielle.
So they should have written to you, Ben, of all people. So that's very funny. We've got to start by just really celebrating the fact that our legislature and governor have faced the reality that climate change is an existential threat and have set ambitious goals for our state. The Next Generation Climate Roadmap is a very important piece of legislation. So that's what is really terrific. The clarity of direction that as a Commonwealth, as one Commonwealth, we are in fact going to fight this existential threat. Now, then the question is, where are things not what they should be, and where can we bring improvements? I'm going to beat the same drum. It is about the people who are at the driver's seat. It's really not okay that the governor asked, or the Department of Public Utilities more specifically, gas companies to be the one to produce the scenarios for how we would reach net zero. And as we all know, net zero is a loophole for fossil fuel companies. So with those two things together, it's a guarantee that we won't get where we need to get. So that's the single most important thing we have to do, is change the question of who is in the driver's seat and empower people who are in the driver's seat to do that comprehensive strategic design of a next generation energy infrastructure. Now, equity is at the core of that too. As our legislature embraced goals of equity, defined environmental justice communities, that is another hugely important forward movement. And again, let's celebrate them, lift them up. Kudos to our state government. But we've been through another transition recently as we've been trying to take apart the war on drugs and have now a cannabis industry in our state. But we have watched as the opportunity, economic opportunity provided by that has not gone to the communities most harmed by the war on drugs. We have to avoid that outcome here as we work on this transition away from fossil fuels. So in that regard, again, it comes back to who's at the driver's seat. People directly impacted in environmental justice communities need to be alongside those who have been building renewable energy infrastructure at the driver's seat, in the driver's seat for our key commissions, our key regulatory bodies, and the like.
Thank you very much, Danielle. We'll now move on to the next question, and we will begin with Ben Downing. How would you leverage regional and federal efforts to drive the growth of solar and clean energy in Massachusetts? And as an example, we have the recently passed infrastructure bill. I think we were hoping by this point that Build Back Better would have already been signed by the president. But talk to us about leveraging regional and federal efforts and resources.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. So a couple of thoughts. First, as sort of the goals and driving principles and values, one of the things that we've put forward in the campaign is that 80% of the federal resources that come back to Massachusetts ought to be used towards climate adaptation, climate mitigation, clean energy efforts across the board. Now, that's a broad catch-all that can allow you to do a lot of important work. work like investing in transit, investing in multifamily affordable housing, hardening a lot of our existing infrastructure. It's one of the reasons why in the climate plan that I rolled out back in March, we also said that there would be a climate mandate across all of state government, because this is not the work just of the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs, but rather it has to be the work of all of state government. It has to be the priority of all of state government. You know, we do ourselves no favors if housing and economic development are providing grants to projects that are only going to dig that hole even deeper. If the Department of Transportation is not thinking about climate in all that we do, then it will only make all of this work that much more difficult. So setting that clear goal that 80% of federal resources would go towards climate action was critically important. Along with that, I think, again, the establishment of a civilian climate corps is a critically important initiative for addressing the gaps that all of us have highlighted around the equities in the benefit of the transition to a clean energy economy. One of the underlying challenges here isn't about the technology, it's about trust. It's about making sure that there is trust and the state is partnering with the organizations on the ground, doing the work in their community, listening to their neighbors, trying to address the negative impacts of fossil fuels and transition away to a clean energy economy, working with groups like Green Roots in Chelsea, like Arise for Social Justice in Springfield and others, to make sure that we are developing solutions that meet the challenges that they see every single day. I think these are the steps that we can take. Also, I think the federal resources are a massive opportunity to pilot clean heat technology programs, to think about what that future looks like for our thermal system so that we are not completely dependent on gas the way we are right now. And if this is geothermal, if it's more air source heat pump deployment, a variety of other technologies to think about what that future looks like. I think we have all the tools to do it, and this is the time to make the most of all of them.
Thank you very much, Ben. We'll now go to Danielle for her response.
Thanks so much. So the most important thing is to recognize that infrastructure policy is climate policy, and climate policy is infrastructure policy. So the infrastructure bill is a hugely important opportunity to do work on transportation infrastructure. It's also an opportunity alongside the COVID relief funds to do work on our housing infrastructure in the Commonwealth. We need to ensure that for every infrastructure project we're moving forward, we are using a renewable energy economy frame with that project. So in housing, how do we use zoning reform, and in commercial buildings and the like, to make sure that we are transitioning away from emissions? In transportation, we've got to use those infrastructure dollars to drive a transition to public transportation and electrification. So the infrastructure bill is a huge opportunity to support growth of solar and clean energy in Massachusetts for sure. And then Build Back Better makes that even stronger. And really importantly, in Build Back Better, I want to come back to that story about my dad that I started with, the tax credit that's in that. And the fact that we've got a 30% subsidy there for solar is huge. And especially important is the fact that it's going to be there for 10 years. So that does give people the certainty to invest in new infrastructure and to get that work done on solar. It's the certainty is the piece that's really been missing for people as we've struggled to start to drive this transition. So I'm especially excited about that income tax credit in the Build Back Better bill.
Thank you very much, Danielle. We'll now turn to Sonia.
Thanks, Mark. So, I'm happy to report I'm not waiting to be in the governor's seat to leverage these sources, right? As others have said, the opportunity of the federal infrastructure bill, hopefully Build Back Better, and the ARPA funding that's already come to the state, they are, humongous opportunities to take critical steps toward a Green New Deal for Massachusetts, right? One that invests in building the green energy economy and that supports our families and the future of our planet all at once. Last night, we just got the conference committee report out from the House Senate negotiations on our plan to spend the first big tranche of that ARPA money. And, that package is going to be a template, right, for how we can do this as a state that we can build off of with the additional billions of dollars coming from the federal government with the infrastructure bill. And again, hopefully, let's all speak it into existence with the Build Back Better bill. We included in this ARPA spending package hundreds of millions of dollars for clean energy infrastructure. I want to be very clear on record. that I wish that we had spent more in this package. I had called early on for 90% of the money that we currently have already from ARPA to be spent out, committed in legislation before the end of this calendar year. We're not reaching that threshold, but what we are spending, we are putting a big sort of marker down for clean energy infrastructure. And then importantly, in the legislature's package, we coupled that infrastructure money with money for the human infrastructure, right? The workforce that we're going to need to actually build and maintain this physical infrastructure. That was from an amendment that I put into the Senate ARPA package, and that I was thrilled to see last night made it into the final conference committee report. We need to, with both types of investment, with the physical infrastructure and with the human infrastructure, we need to be targeting those categories heavily, both to serve and to build jobs and wealth in the communities that have borne the heaviest costs of fossil fuel dependency and that remain the most exposed to the harms of climate change. That's why the language that I got into the bill targeted that money for the workforce to minority serving two-year colleges where their student population is disproportionately of color, to get those grants to do the workforce development for Green New Deal jobs in Massachusetts. And if anybody is interested and wants to geek out on this, you can check out arpascorecard.com, which is where myself, a handful of legislators, and several community organizations and civil rights organizations laid out a framework for what we need to be doing to target our infrastructure dollars from the federal government in ways that are going to benefit communities that have been hardest hit.
Thank you very much, Sonia. And we did get word Orlando would be the next person to answer, but he's having technical difficulties, so staff is working with him to try and reestablish his connection. But we will move on to the next question, which is related to energy storage. So energy storage, with or without solar, is a critical component of getting to 100% renewables. How would you accelerate the implementation of storage across the Commonwealth? And we'll begin with Danielle.
Thanks a lot. So I've been talking a lot about our goal setting, how we define our purposes here, the importance of having clarity about our shared goal as our starting point. The vocabulary of sustainability is now at the heart of how we all think about responding to the existential threat of climate change. We need to get to a place where the vocabulary of stability is just as important as the vocabulary of sustainability. And that then is about energy storage, as you know. So at the end of the day, we first of all need to build public understanding of the importance of energy storage. We don't really have that yet. It's still kind of niche and expert level of understanding. So we actually have to drive a public education campaign around energy storage and its importance. And doing that then provides the basis for public investment in implementation of energy storage for both residential and commercial contexts. We do have amazing academic and industrial expertise in the state that's really rapidly advancing our knowledge for how to make good use of energy storage. And so from my point of view, we are sitting on a huge opportunity to go ahead and convert that into applications that can be picked up at the municipal level, at the state level, state implementation in terms of the state's own immediate energy use for public agencies, our public transport system, and the like. But in order to do that, we have to begin by building public understanding so that we can support the investments necessary to achieve implementation.
Thank you very much, Danielle. I will now go to Sonia to respond.
Thanks, Mark. I'll say +1 on what Danielle had to say about public education on this. We also need to continue to invest in storage through the SMART program. What they have done in the SMART program, we should also be replicating in any and all renewable energy programs that we are standing up as a state. We need to basically acknowledge in the design of these programs and structuring all of them that most forms of renewable energy, not all, right, not geothermal necessarily, but most of them are intermittent, and therefore storage has to be a part of the puzzle. We need to bake storage into plans for maintenance and just rolling investments in our distribution infrastructure. And we need to use our influence to push for adaptation of the market rules of ISO New England so that they are working to do the same for storage coupled with renewables at the transmission level.
Thank you very much, Sonia. We'll now go to Ben to respond.
So a couple of thoughts here, right? First, I think storage shows the shortcomings of the last 8 years. So the last bill that I wrote in the legislature created the requirement for the then Baker administration to put forward an energy storage goal. Unfortunately, because this administration has been timid with the tools that they have when it comes to climate, we've blown through that goal because of the incentives that Sonia and Danielle and I have talked about here within the SMART program and others. That goal wasn't aspirational. It didn't push any more development or activity than it otherwise should have. So setting the goal was a good thing, but we need to be more clear, more prescriptive. We need to be bigger. We need to be more ambitious and more bold. We also need to do the unfinished work that the Baker administration themselves called out in their state of charge report. The one thing that has not been implemented from the state of charge report, their foundational review of energy storage and the impact it could have in Massachusetts, was a single rebate program, something akin to the California self-generation incentive program. That's how you're going to get wide-scale deployment, a simple incentive that allows the broad deployment of energy storage, yes, coupled with solar, but also storage alone to help limit the peaks on our system, because we know those peaks are the dirtiest hours and the dirtiest times of every single year, to lessen the overall cost in our system. Storage is a game changer. I've worked on multiple projects at Nexamp. We saw those projects start to come to be, and we know that we are saving tens of thousands of dollars for customers because they didn't just have solar, they had solar and storage together. Clear incentives, bigger incentives, something along the lines of what California has done.
Thank you very much, Ben. We'll now move on to the next question. As we all know, there are 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts, and in many ways, it's the cities and towns that are innovating and leading on clean energy and climate, whether supported by the Green Communities program or of their own initiative. Two examples in Watertown and Medford, they've moved to require solar on new commercial construction. Do you see this as the right path to increasing solar adoption, or would you recommend another path? And we'll start with Sonia.
Thanks. So the simple answer to this question is I do. I do see it as the right path. Requiring solar on new construction wherever it's feasible, given orientation and shading and sun exposure, both helps us advance toward our net zero emissions goals, and it is a way to help prepare for a more storm resilient energy future. Watertown and Medford are showing the way here locally. California has done the same at this, at a statewide scale. And I'm very heartened, by what I've seen from California. Their Energy Commission estimates that for a residential customer, the solar standards that they've put in place would add about $40 to an average monthly mortgage payment, but save consumers about $80 on their monthly heating, cooling, and lighting bills. So this is a win-win for families and for the environment. My administration will eliminate emissions from new buildings by 2030, and solar requirements is going to be a critical part of that.
Thank you very much, Sonia. We'll now move on to Ben to respond to the same question.
So simple answer that, well, first of all, Mark, I feel like this question clearly came from a former town manager, clearly came from someone who is intimately aware of the Green Communities program. So I just want to call that out, call it where it is, right? But I think we have seen some of the real leadership on these issues come from the 351 cities and towns, come from local Green Communities commissions and green commissions that have come together. So yes, absolutely, I support the work of Watertown and Medford, and would absolutely have this as a requirement for all new building moving forward statewide in Massachusetts. I would also have a competition among the 351 cities and towns, a race to zero emissions, where towns develop their own plans to try to get to zero emissions, that the state makes the only requirement that you have to implement it no matter what, but that there will be a reward above and beyond that. We have these great traditions and rivalries among our communities. Let's use it for the most important competition that we could have in the next decade, which is the race to get to 100% clean energy and the race to get to zero emissions. So I think we need to tap into the energy at the local level. I'm excited to do it and build off of what Watertown and Medford are doing.
Thank you, Ben, and no comment on your reference there. We'll move now on to Danielle to respond to that same question.
Thanks a lot. No, it's terrific to see the leadership that Watertown and Medford have set out here. They've made the choice balancing multiple considerations that's right for their community. I think the important thing we have to do is set the conditions where all of our municipalities, all 351 beautiful towns and cities, as Ben was saying, are planning, are putting markers in the sand and working toward them. So in my housing policy and other aspects of our agenda, we are focused on requiring that planning process, requiring zoning reform as a part of what we're doing, and setting fresh targets for people. And as we ask people to do that, though, we are also asking people to make decisions that are community specific and take the considerations of their community into account. So we need to see all communities heading towards that goal of supporting our 100% renewable energy by 2040. But by the same token, we have to recognize that we are moving through a period of time where costs are changing in dramatic ways, but do have an impact on questions like economic development and the like, and the question of whether or not people can and municipalities can successfully support business formation, support recruitment of businesses into that locale. So I believe as long as communities are clearly articulating that sustainability and stability of energy goal, and also clearly articulating goals around economic development, they will find the package of solutions that are right for them. My hope would be that we will see many more Watertown and Medfords for sure choosing this particular path. But we do, I think at this point, need to bring that ingenuity and creativity of our municipalities to bear on finding the right solution among sets of principles.
Thank you very much, Danielle. I'm going to turn it back over to Nick, who is going to ask some questions relative to utilities. As we know, they play an integral part now and will in the future on clean energy and climate implementation. And so, Nick, we'll turn it over to you to ask questions on that topic.
Sure. Thank you, Mark. Indeed, the utilities in this, for those of us in the solar industry, are our gatekeepers. So I have a broad question for each of you. I think some of you have touched on this, but we would ask, what role should the utilities play in determining the energy future of the Commonwealth? And should the role they are currently playing be altered in any way? And let's start with you, Ben.
So I think the role that the utilities should play, just generally in the process, they should have input, but they shouldn't have a veto. And too often, the utilities have had a veto, especially over the last 7 years in the policymaking process. It is assumed that they are independent experts when they clearly bring a worldview for how they see the future developing and how we make this transition. One, I don't think they see us making the transition with the urgency and with the pace that we need. And I don't think they see a fundamental shift in their business model coming. And unfortunately, I don't think that's compatible with where we need to get to. That is why in my climate plan, we made restructuring the utilities through a REV-like process here in Massachusetts a key part of this. The utilities can be the market managers, the poles and wires operators, but they shouldn't be making value judgments and shouldn't be sort of the keepers of the key that allow clean energy from coming onto the grid or not. Case in point on this, right here in East Boston, where I'm coming from right now, Eversource says they need a new substation and they want to locate it in a floodplain. If that project was in New York, they'd have to actually justify it, show the data, and we could promote clean energy alternatives and storage and actually see what works best for the community. We don't have that process. We'll have greater transparency. They should have input, but not a veto in our clean energy future.
Thank you, Ben. Danielle.
I agree with that. I agree with that for sure. The utilities are stakeholders. They too have a lot of restructuring and transformation that they're needing to go through at this point in time. But they need to be in the process in a role where they're contributing their perspective and learning from a map for transition so that they can plan and think about restructuring in relationship to a transition that is defined independently of them. So that's the challenge. And it does mean we have to, again, change the structure of appointments that have been made in key places, the designation of how particular regulations are being drafted and vetted and the like. So I think this is a point I've made a few times already, so I won't continue at this point, but yes, we do need an alteration.
Thank you, Danielle. Sonia.
We absolutely need to alter their role. Right now, utility companies are the strongest voices in the room. when it comes to our green energy future, while they continue to profit off of fossil fuels. I know since as of yesterday, Governor Baker is no longer in the race implicitly, but I think it's important that we tell the truth and diagnose with clear eyes so that we can stop making the same mistakes. Our current governor has been letting lobbyists from the same big utility companies that profit off of gas and gas-fired electricity, and the same ones that are sending Ben that email about what is the future of gas, what should it look like. He's been letting them write the plan for the future of gas in our Commonwealth, and we are seeing the result. Utilities are doubling down on fossil fuels like gas while slow rolling the clean energy transition, and they're using our energy dollars to do it. That's totally unacceptable. It is critical that we significantly expand the stakeholders at the table. The DPU, along with other state agencies, must get serious about decarbonizing our state in a way that prioritizes impact, health, and equity. And that means that the leaders of the DPU, appointed by the governor, must listen to and collaborate with a broader array of public stakeholders. That includes community leaders, that includes public health experts, climate scientists, not just the utility insiders. So that's been the input process. And then when it comes time to actually making the decisions, the DPU needs to also consider a wider array of factors in its ultimate decisions, including public health and equity, which again, thankfully is now statutorily required, thanks to the roadmap bill and the amendment that I sponsored on equity that I mentioned earlier. So it's both about, we have tools here, right, for changing their role, both in the statutory requirements on the DPU and in the appointments that any one of us as governor would make, right, in order to drive that culture change.
Thank you very much, Sonia. I think many of you have touched on interconnection already, and I think as most of you know, every solar project must apply to the utilities for interconnection approval before moving forward. And it can be a lengthy and challenging process. The question is, delays in interconnection approval and increased interconnection costs have greatly hampered solar adoption. How would you address this issue? And we'll start with Danielle.
Thanks so much. So I'm sure you've all been closely tracking the work that DPU is doing and the recent announcement of next steps, November 30th. So I would love to get feedback from all of you about what you think about strengths and weaknesses in the work that's just come out. To some extent, the repricing structure, where there are then reimbursements over time to those who are connecting to the grid, is interesting to me. It looks like a useful piece of a model for changing the incentive structure so that we can support uptake. At the same time, though, I did not see a solution to what looks to me like one of the core problems. In particular, we have a problem of sort of one by one decision making, where we really need to be able to make tranches of decisions together and provide the institutional support to have that strategic action that is thinking about the overall structure of our energy infrastructure. I did not see a solution to that. In that regard, I am very excited to see Representative Golden's work continue to move forward. But again, I think this is a moment for stock taking. I'd be very interested in SEBANE's opinion on what the result was of that November 30th response from DPU.
Thank you, Danielle. Back to you, Mark.
You still have Sonia and Ben.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sonia, please proceed. My mistake. I'm looking at.
No problem. No problem. My answer on this one, I think, is pretty short and sweet. As I said earlier, we have to do a lot better on interconnection. And that I think is fundamentally about culture change at the DPU, which will begin with, right out of the gates, as governor, appointing DPU commissioners who are deeply and fundamentally committed to that culture change and to being drivers of new and better outcomes on interconnection. And I think this really relates closely to the question, the previous question about the role of utilities in determining our energy future. Their incentives, the utilities' incentives, are to preserve the status quo, from which they are profiting quite handsomely. And that status quo does not include speedy interconnection, right? Or easy and clear interconnection. And so the DPU, on behalf of the public that is suffering from those decisions, has to provide that pressure on the utilities in order to do better on this front.
Thank you, Sonia. Ben.
I think it's worth calling out sort of where we are right now, right? Like we're a decade plus into this transition to a distributed renewable grid. And you would have thought, as we have done tens, hundreds, thousands of solar projects over the course of that time, the process should have gotten simpler. It should have gotten easier. It should have gotten less costly. It's gotten more complex, more costly, and even with the utilities being allowed to own solar, the only type of generation they're allowed to own, they somehow haven't found a good way to start to interconnect these projects of any and all sizes. I had problems putting solar on my roof here in East Boston. I, like everyone on this forum today, could go through a litany of issues we've had with interconnection. I am convinced the only way to change the culture at the utilities and at the DPU is to tie their revenue to clean energy deployment goals. The utilities need to see it in their financial interest to hit deployment goals around clean energy. There can be planning, there can be targeting of locations where the grid needs it the most, but we've got to tie their financial health and well-being to the deployment of clean energy. That's the only way we're going to get out of this seemingly never-ending debate we've had about building the future that we all want and that we put into law, and yet status quo actors like the utilities stand in the way of.
Thanks, Ben. Mark, all yours.
Thank you very much, Nick. I will be going through the next three questions regarding land use, environmental justice in low income, and jobs. The first question is related to land use. There has been an ongoing debate around land use and the siting of solar in Massachusetts, and I might add other states in the region. What are your thoughts on this issue? And we'll start with Sonia.
So we need less than 1% of the land in Massachusetts to get us to our statewide goals for solar, right? That's about 60,000 acres. We can get a lot closer to that by improving interconnection, right? And also by improving our distribution infrastructure. I think we need to shift this conversation from where we can't have solar to where do we want to have solar, and then solve interconnection first for that. And then that can get us a long way. I really, I want to see how far that first tier of solution gets us toward those 60,000 acres. And I suspect it will be a substantial amount.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Ben.
So first, I think this is a good problem to have. I remember when we were first starting to implement our solar programs, I used to stop and take pictures of every solar project I saw. If I did that between Pittsfield and East Boston now, I'd never get anywhere, right? Like, so that this is a good problem to have, in that we are seeing the deployment of a technology that was boutique at one point, now mature, and now become what is going to fuel our future. I think through a REV-like proceeding, a restructuring of the utility rates and business models, we can provide greater locational benefits to drive more development closer to existing load centers, closer to existing buildings, to try to ease some of the pressures and some of the challenges that we've seen between communities and development. Invariably, there will be some of it, but I think with locational values, we can do a far better job of directing development where we want to. And then again, planning with communities, as I mentioned in the Race to Zero program, to make sure they have outlined areas where they want to have solar development and when they're encouraging folks in. I think those are two targeted steps that can lead to more constructive developments, that can lead to a more constructive debate. And to Sonia's point and Danielle's as well, getting at this on interconnection helps address these challenges too.
Yeah, this is a super important issue, and it really gets to how many different important challenges in our Commonwealth are connected to each other. So we need to achieve these solar arrays across the whole Commonwealth. For me, this is a kind of one Commonwealth concern and project and ambition. But we also have the challenge of issues around conservation, protection of our beautiful natural resources, biodiversity. That's an important part too of our climate goals here. And then we have the further challenge of the relationship between land use, housing, business development, and commercial development, and economic development for different parts of the state. And so there is a danger of pursuing and moving forward in a fashion where we just sort of start by putting all the solar in the places where it's currently cheapest to put the solar. And then I think we get the wrong answers on conservation. We got the wrong answers on housing and economic development. So that means then we really have to tackle those placements in places like parking lots, on top of cement surfaces in some of our built out areas. Those are more expensive places to put those solar arrays, of course. So for me, that does come back to a place where there's another really important moment and opportunity for public investment, but one where we have to recognize that those public investments in a more expensive version of a solar array in a place that is already built out are actually co-funding investments in land conservation, investments in communities, being able to build healthy communities that are also about bringing jobs and economic opportunity to that location. That's why you've got to have a one Commonwealth perspective to tackle these questions. It can't just be municipality by municipality or sector by sector. I think nothing brings that out more clearly than the issue of land use in relationship to solar.
Thank you very much, Danielle. We have two more questions, and I know the lightning round was supposed to start at 1:20, but these two questions are so critically important. So we will continue with the questions, and I'm sure we'll have time for the lightning round at the end. The first is a question about environmental justice and low income. Massachusetts is yet to deliver on providing access to solar to low-income customers. Is this a priority for you, and how would you address this disparity? And we'll start with Ben.
Yes, this is a priority for me, and it has been throughout my entire career working on these issues. That's why when we were writing the legislation to create the Mass Clean Energy Center, when folks just wanted to turn it into a business development agency, I advocated for initiatives to create the Pathways Out of Poverty program and to make sure that the Mass CEC was thinking about equity in all that it does. With greater support for that agency, they'll be able to do a lot more, because unfortunately, they have a million different missions and they don't have the support to do just about any of it. Greater support will allow them to do more of that work. That's also why in this campaign and the climate plan that I rolled out back in March, there was a commitment to make Massachusetts only the second state in the nation to guarantee that a proportion of the benefits of a transition to a clean energy economy will go to environmental justice communities. One state does that right now. That's New York, and they set it at 40%. Under the climate plan that I filed that we'll implement when I'm governor, there is a commitment that 50% of those benefits go to environmental justice communities. It's critically important that we be intentional in this work. If we just roll out another incentive program, we know exactly what we're going to get. Those are the resources, and those who look the best for developers, that's where you see the benefit. We need to partner through a civilian climate conservation corps with local-based environmental and community organizations to make sure that the benefits of clean energy are going into communities that have borne the brunt of fossil fuel infrastructure, higher asthma rates, higher chronic heart disease rates, lower life expectancy, infant mortality issues across the board. And the exciting thing is these communities are leading the way. Chelsea and Chinatown on the microgrid that they're working on, and plenty of others as well. The work is there to be done. We need the intentionality and the urgency from our governor, and that's what I plan to bring.
Thank you very much, Ben. Danielle, to you.
Thanks so much. This is critical. And again, it was one of the most important things of the Next Generation Climate Roadmap, that it in fact defined environmental justice communities and dedicated revenue streams to the support of environmental justice communities. I want to focus both actually on the question of jobs and on the question of solar rollout. We do need to be bringing green jobs into the Commonwealth. And I gave the example of the cannabis industry already, where in the midst of a transition, we have not actually secured benefits for the communities most impacted by the negativities of the world that we have been living in. We need to make sure that's different this time. I think that really requires strong partnerships with unions that are working hard on diversification through apprenticeship programs, through training programs, and really working to change the opportunity structure for workers in the Commonwealth. So that seems to be fundamental as we're thinking about solar and the jobs, expanding jobs in solar, that we build on those partnerships that make sure those opportunities come to everybody with strong workforce development chances. Then we also really do need to make sure that we fix the SMART program, that we have dedicated revenue streams to support environmental justice communities in terms of adoption of solar and the like. And that, at the end of the day as well, needs to be supported by a public education campaign. So a public education campaign that is about stability for energy as well as sustainability. But then at the end of the day too, is about helping communities come to real clarity about how they can take ownership and be empowered in relationship to their own energy lives and the quality of their health around them, the quality of the air around them, the sort of freedom from the emissions that we get from gas in our houses and the like. We need all of that education as well.
Thank you very much, Danielle and Sonia.
So first of all, I want to thank you for not cutting this, question out when time was pinched. I think that's a statement of your values at SEBANE, right? That this needs to stay at the heart of the work that we're doing. Solar equity is a critical priority for me. It is legislation that I have been filing for, I think, 6 years now. The fact that, Ben or I or Danielle, I don't know if you have solar on your roof, but, the fact that we as homeowners get paid the full retail rate for solar that we generate on our homes as homeowners, but that, my daughter's friend, their parents who are renters, cannot get access to that same retail rate. It's just, it's morally absurd. And it is also ineffective at helping us reach our goals to green energy transition. So that's one. Solar equity, absolutely no question, it's a priority. I'm fighting for it and will continue to do so, absolutely, and use my bully pulpit as governor. I have also been filing EJ legislation since my first term in office 12 years ago. And so it was an enormous, moment of pride and gratification to see that, to see it get codified in the next generation roadmap bill. Using the solar equity legislation that I filed as a model, as a governor, I would ensure that low and moderate income residents have greater access to programs that incentivize adoption for solar technology. I also want to note that I will support legislation and increased investments in green spaces, in flood mitigation, in reduction of heat islands, and other measures to reduce unequal climate impacts, right? Solar equity is an important piece of it, but it's not the whole enchilada. And then finally, but certainly not least on this list, equity also means, and I salute my colleagues on this panel for mentioning this as well, that equity also means equity in the economic opportunities of the burgeoning green economy, right? That is why I filed the Green New Deal jobs amendment in the ARPA package. It's why I worked to develop and release the racial equity scorecard that I mentioned for how we're spending our ARPA dollars. In Massachusetts, hopefully it can become a template for our federal infrastructure and Build Back Better dollars, so that we have a very explicit, quantitative, transparent tracking system for spending the millions of dollars, billions of dollars that are going to be coming into Massachusetts. And we can see very clearly, are we succeeding, or are we just talking the talk but not walking the walk when it comes to jobs and wealth development in EJ communities.
Thank you very much, Sonia. And that's a good follow-on to our next question, our last full question, which is about jobs. The Massachusetts solar industry currently employs about 10,000 people in the Commonwealth, but will require more workers as our industry grows and our commitment grows deeper on climate and clean energy. How might your administration help us attract new talent, specifically with a focus on tradespeople, diversity, and inclusion? And we'll begin with Danielle.
I apologize, I forgot this question was coming, so you already heard part of my answer.
That's okay, that's okay.
So, no, I do think we have some really impressive examples around the Commonwealth. We have the Carpenters Union, for example, which has done an extraordinary job of working on diversity and inclusion, thinking about issues, of course, of apprenticeship and training, but also issues of childcare, which are critical for getting people into the workforce. And so we need to take the example of that and work across sectors to make sure that we are both bringing jobs to where people are and really giving people the ladders of opportunity that connect them to those jobs. The short of it, the good news is we know how to do it. We do actually know how to diversify sectors. We know how to connect people to opportunity. The question is whether we have the will and the focus to stay on it and hold people accountable. So this is a place, again, where we do need accountability metrics for how jobs are developing and growing. We need a good jobs economy where we as a state are tracking that and holding those who are creating jobs accountable for the work they're doing to ensure jobs are going to communities that need the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Danielle. Sonia.
Make sure my mute's off. So look, I don't have to tell SEBANE folks, you guys know better than most how poised Massachusetts is to massively grow our green energy workforce. But it is going to take dedicated attention, sustained attention, and intentionality and investment to do it right and to do it equitably. Danielle's 100% right. When she mentions the cannabis industry, that we don't get opportunities that often, right, to give rise to totally new industries in our state. We have got to grab these opportunities with both hands in order to seize the opportunity to feed two birds with one hand, and both build those industries and also close the racial wealth divide in our state. So, I mentioned the amendment that I got into the ARPA spending package. It's, again, $7.5 million, and thankfully made it through in the conference committee negotiations. That is targeted specifically to minority serving institutions that are two-year, in this case, two-year colleges to train the workforce for our Green New Deal future in Massachusetts. That's a template. I will work as governor with employers, with UMass, with our community colleges, with trade schools, but again, at every turn, heavily targeted to where students of color, where communities of color are in our Commonwealth, to develop the workforce training programs to allow tens of thousands of Massachusetts residents. It's an enormous opportunity to launch a career in the clean energy economy, and not just jobs, but also to launch businesses. Right, we need to grow wealth as well as workforce in this industry, and we're going to ensure that those efforts prioritize communities of color and other EJ communities. And just to get really specific here, in the example of the ARPA package, in addition to that Green New Deal jobs amendment, we also got language in the bill that thankfully survived conference committee that puts in place a very crisp process by which we are going to name and then watchdog and bird dog these goals, right? So that there is going to be a community informed board of folks that are going to set goals, both statewide goals and agency by agency goals for how we're going to perform in targeting these investments to communities of color and hardest hit communities. And that we're going to have a very clear tracking system, a public facing tracking system in place to drive performance against those goals. So we will be able to see at the end of the year, 2 years, 3 years, did we actually hit the mark with the promises that we made for building jobs and building wealth in EJ communities.
Thank you very much, Sonia. And before I hand it off to Ben for his final words on this particular question, because we are at time, we will forego the lightning round. And I know some of the candidates have to get on to other commitments. So we'll turn it over to Ben for his response to this final question, and then we will wrap up.
I see, Danielle, I see your point in the chat. Do you want to conclude if you've got to run to a flight? I'm happy to go after.
You'll go for it, Ben? No.
Okay. I don't want to be the reason you've got to pull a Home Alone running through the airport, right? Like I know I couldn't run like that right now. So a couple of points on this point, right? First, I think this ties into a broader issue around the vocational education programs and system across the state. We don't have a planning function for vocational programs. There's been important reform steps that have been taken and led by a broad coalition, in particular led by New Bedford Mayor John Mitchell. But there are more steps that we need to take to make sure that vocational education is providing opportunities for kids across the state to have the skills, the hands-on experience to be able to get trained in industries that are growing and that are going to need their work for years. The exciting thing about where those VOC programs are right now and also where the gaps are right now is that they allow us to do concrete intentional work on diversifying the workforce of those industries, and in particular with solar. I know at NexAmp we had an ongoing program with Madison Park, and I think with support from the Mass Clean Energy Center, working with vocational programs across the state, we could take lessons learned from the Mass CEC internship program and make sure that we are building that long-standing pipeline of the future, welders, fitters, laborers, carpenters, you name it, electricians, everyone that we need in this workforce to be able to grow today and grow into the future, and to do it in a way that is diverse and that is more representative of where we want to be and not where we are right now. So I think those are the steps I would take above and beyond the ones that Danielle and Sonia have highlighted, which are all absolutely spot on.
Thank you very much, Ben. That concludes the formal question portion. As I mentioned, we are at time, so we're going to allow, in lieu of the lightning round, each one of the candidates to give a 1-minute closing, and recognizing that Danielle, we don't want her running through doing the home alone thing as Ben suggested. We'll start with Danielle for closing remarks.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's very kind of you. I am Danielle Allen, candidate for governor. I believe it's time for us to reimagine ourselves as one Commonwealth and to knit our diverse communities across the state together. We need to build public commitment for hard work and strategic investment in the basic building blocks of a green and healthy next generation democracy. I will commit to 100% renewable energy economy by 2040, and I will commit to putting in the driver's seat in our commissions and regulatory bodies those who will lean into transition, drive that change, and help us all secure the green and healthy next generation democracy that we deserve. Thank you so much for this terrific panel. It's been a real pleasure to be with all of you and with my wonderful colleagues, Ben and Sonia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danielle. We really appreciate your participation. We wish you all the luck and a great happy holiday. We'll now go to Ben Downing for his closing remark.
Sure. I remember sitting in politics and the environmental movement at Providence College. Tony Affinyi was my professor. I knew next to nothing about climate change, and I came out of that class transformed, changed in every way possible. That class made me think that no matter what I do, whatever I'm lucky enough to do with my career, climate has to be a part of that work. And I was lucky enough to be able to do that work with many members of SEBANE and others at this transformative time in Massachusetts when it came to the Green Communities Act and the launching of a clean energy revolution. We have the opportunity to do similar revolutionary work again here, and maybe more important work, because time is being wasted and time is the least renewable resource that we have. I got into this race to change a culture on Beacon Hill that too often was too complacent, that too often kicked the can down the road to the next session, to the next election, to the next administration. We can't afford to do that anymore when it comes to climate. And as much as that can be scary, I am more hopeful than I ever have been before after spending the last 4 years working in the clean energy industry. I know we have all the tools and the resources to meet this moment, to build a fairer, stronger Massachusetts from one corner of the state to the next. I'm running to be your governor because it's our time to build the Massachusetts we all know is possible. I look forward to earning your trust and support over the course of this campaign. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with my colleagues on the campaign trail. We're incredibly lucky to have this great field of candidates, and I look forward to debating and discussing the issues that we all want to address in the days, weeks, and months ahead. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Ben. I'll now turn it over to Sonia for her closing remarks.
Thanks very much, Mark. Thanks, Ben. Thank you, Danielle. If she's still with us, I hope you make your flight. This has been a delight, right? I am a policy geek at heart, and nerding out for an hour plus on this issue is I'm so grateful to SEBANE for convening us and for making this the first candidate forum of the race. I'm going off script here, and I'm just going to say that moving with urgency and making moonshots into realities have been the hallmark of my 12 years in the state legislature. When I started the fight for comprehensive criminal justice reform, or with Ben on transgender equal rights, or for generational scale change in our K-12 funding education, our education funding system. These are things that people said were impossible and that would never happen on Beacon Hill. And, setting sights on a distant goal, but a morally urgent goal, and then building the winning coalitions, across our state, regionally, across party lines in many cases, and across, race, class, age, faith, and getting it done in order to get those big changes, those big systemic changes into the end zone, is what I have been doing for the past 12 years. As I said in my opening, climate change is the whole ballgame, right? If we don't get this right, it's, you know, not going to matter nearly as much, right? If we have our other, you know, if we're achieving literacy, or, you know, housing stabilization, or lowering commute times, right? If all of it is being wiped away by extreme weather and climate change. As a parent, as a mother, you know, I look at my 6-year-old and my 8-year-old, and in the same way that the urgency that I see for them drove my work on education funding, right? I mean, every year of that 5-year battle on education funding, I said to myself, my kids might be okay. But if we take 5 years to get this done, there are going to be hundreds of thousands of kids in our state for whom that is not okay, right? That's nearly the entirety of their elementary school experience, and they will never get those years back. The same is true for making the transition to clean energy. You know, for every year that we wait and have waited to put these goals in place, to put environmental justice policy in place, we have more fossil fuel infrastructure coming online, and we are slowing our roll toward, you know, the goals that we need to urgently get to. So you can expect that kind of urgency from me as governor, and you can expect me to be able to put together the winning coalitions to actually get the solutions done. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Again, thank you to all 4 of the declared candidates for governor. This was a fantastic forum. If this is any indication of the candidates and their knowledge during this campaign, it's going to be a very great campaign with some great exchange of ideas, particularly on clean energy and climate. And there'll be great opportunities for each one of us as voters to select candidates that are very much focused on the clean energy and the climate crisis. On behalf of the members of SEBANE, I want to thank you all for your participation. Senator Sonia Chang-Diaz, former Senator Ben Downing, Orlando Silva, and Professor Danielle Allen. It was a great forum. We've already gotten great feedback from some of our members on this discussion, and I'm glad that it was a discussion. You can, to the members and guests that have been participating, you can learn more about each one of these candidates. They each have a website that you can go to and learn more about their platform, not only on clean energy and climate, but on the other priority issues they have for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I also would be remiss if I didn't thank those members of Fields Associates that made this happen on behalf of SEBANE, Kate Plord Johnson, Debbie Crooks, and Grace Alves, all of Fields Associates. I also want to thank Nick, my co-moderator during the question period. I want to thank the board of directors of SEBANE and the members and other guests that participated. As I mentioned, we did record this and we will be providing it so that others can get the same benefit that we did to hear from all of you and to hear your platforms and your priorities on clean energy and climate. Unless there's anything else, Kate or Nick, I'd like to again thank the candidates, wish you a great holiday season and good luck on the campaign trail. And we'll wrap. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Be well.